In this module, we will discuss topologies in more detail and how to use them to run test cases on multiple test beds. Topologies provide a layer of abstraction to a test case, keeping testbed details like IP addresses and login info in a separate file. They are also a handy way to organize different testbeds in your environment. 99% of automation environments should use topologies. Creating many topologies might mean some extra work up front, but it will pay off in reduced development and maintenance effort as your automation libraries grow. The only time it might not make sense to use topologies is when you have a very large test environment without velocity. In this case, it could be easier to store device information in something like a MySQL database. Topologies store all the information about a testbed, including any device or environment properties that are applicable to that testbed. Remember, a test case can access topology properties using TBML commands. Any information that changes every time you change a topology should be stored as a topology property instead of a parameter. You can choose one topology at a time to be the global topology, allowing any test case execution to use that topology. Also, each test case can be configured to use a local topology. You can configure which topology will be used when a local and global are both set, but the default is to use the global. Using jobs, run lists, iTest RT, and velocity, which topology to use at runtime. Overwrite the global and local topology settings. Remember to keep topology resource names generic. The test case refers to the resource name to open a session to a device, and we need test cases to work with many different topologies. Name the resource after the role it has in the test case, like DUT, or upstream router, or traffic generator. This test case is fully abstracted. There are no device-specific commands or responses in this test case. How do we indicate which device or which testbed we want to run the test case on? We do this by choosing a topology file. We're looking at our fully abstracted test case. We've removed all the device-specific commands and responses using a quick call library that we built for our Juniper device. This test case is referring to a local topology called training.juniper.tbml. It lives in an automation project called AI Training Labs, where the Juniper topology lives as well. If we take a look at that topology, we can see it consists of a single resource, a device called DUT. That device is going to have a telnet session associated with it, and its telnet session refers to a base session profile called Junos Telnet Base that lives in a Junos device project. Let's take a look at that device project and the base session profile. The base session profile refers to a Juniper Telnet quick call library. If we open it up, we're going to see all the quick calls that we've built that are being used in this test case. So the question now is, how do we run this on a different device, on a different test bed? The answer is to create a new topology with a new device in it. Let's go ahead and create that topology. I'm going to right-click on the Topologies folder in my Training Labs automation project, choose New, and again, because topology is missing from this list, I'm going to click Other and select Topology. I'm going to name this Training Cisco.tbml. And I'm going to hit Finish. This new topology needs to look just like the old topology. So I'm going to grab a switch icon drag it into the canvas, and name it DUT, just like we did in the other topology. So let's take a look back at that just to make sure everything's the same. So I have one device here called DUT. And I have one device here called DUT as well, so that should work. Now, let's take a look at our test case, just as kind of a refresher on how the test case interacts with the topology. So I have in my training.ffTC test case a local topology set to use the Juniper topology. So if I go back to steps, and if I look at my open step for this telnet session, I can see that we're going to open a session to our device. The device is going to be called DUT, and the session is called telnet. So in our original Juniper topology, that name DUT comes from the name of this resource, and that name telnet comes from the name of this session. So our Cisco topology needs to look just like that if our test case is going to be able to work with it in the same way that it works with the Juniper topology. Now, I'll be adding a session to this device, and that session is going to need a base session profile. Base session profiles live in device projects, and we don't have a device project for our Cisco device just yet. So I'm going to cancel out of here, and we're going to create that new device project. So anytime you're working with a new device family for the first time, say a new operating system like we are, we're going to create a new device project. So I go to File, New, and iTest Project. I'll leave this first option selected for Create Default Device Project Structure, and I'm going to name this DI Cisco iOS. Click Finish, and I have an empty device project. Now I could create a new base session profile by right-clicking here, going to New and Session Profile, but I'll show you a nice little shortcut we can do using the topology session. So back in my Cisco topology, I'm going to right-click on my DUT device, click Add Session. We're going to set the session type as Telnet, so that's already there. I'm going to hit this little link here that says Create Reference Session Profile, and this is going to go ahead and create and configure a new reference session profile for us and save us a bunch of steps. So we want this to go in our Cisco device project, so I'll browse and find the session profiles folder in that Cisco iOS device project. Click OK. I'm going to rename this and give it a little more of a readable name. I'll call this Cisco iOS Telnet Base. I'm going to enable this checkbox for response map. It's going to go ahead and configure the base session profile to use the Cisco iOS project as its response map library. And we're going to need a quick call library as well. So I will enable that, and that's going to go ahead and create a quick call library file linked to this session profile. Click OK. And now we have, in the background, you can see a new base session profile has been created. So let's go ahead and finish configuring this topology session with the IP and port name that I need. So again, I'm using an emulator for my Cisco switch here. So I'll be using localhost and a strange port number. I'm just going to go ahead and click Save. Alright, so this is the base session profile that was created for us. If I go to the settings page, I can see that there's already a quick call library associated with it and already a response map library associated with it. So let's go back to our topology, and I can see that the telnet session is available for us. Because we have a new device that we've never interacted with before, with a new device project and a new base session profile, we're going to need to capture the prompts that are used to interact with the device. So just like we did with the Juniper version, we're going to just start the session, hit enter a couple times, maybe a command or two, just to go ahead and get this prompt captured by iTest. When I close my session, I'm going to get a wizard pop up that says it found a new prompt. When I hit next, it's asking where we want to save it. You're going to want to save it in your base session profile. So I'll leave the default checked. We can hit next. And this is the prompt that it found. So I can hit finish. And if I go to my new Cisco base session profile, on the start page, I can see the prompt that was captured. And just like we did before, we're going to need to wildcard out any part of this prompt that can change from device to device. Now this is the device's host name, and of course that's going to be different for each iOS device that you have. So I'm just going to replace that with a asterisk and change the content type to wildcard. And go ahead and save my base session profile. I'm going to save the topology file, go to my test case, and I'm going to set the local topology to use the Cisco topology instead of the Juniper. I'm going to go to my steps page, and we're going to see that the open step is still going to work, right? There's still a DUT device, there's still a telnet session in the new topology, so no errors on this step. However, there are errors on every quick call step that we have here in the test case. If I hover my mouse over that error, it's going to say that each of the quick calls is not available for the currently configured session. So of course, they're not available because we haven't created those quick calls yet. So that'll be our next thing to do. We're going to take a look at our Juniper Telnet quick call library, and we're going to basically duplicate each of these quick calls, but instead of Juniper commands, they're going to be Cisco commands. I'm going to close a couple of these files that we don't need anymore. And I'm going to open my Cisco quick call library. Of course, we just created it, so it's blank, but we need all the quick calls to match the names of the old Juniper quick calls, as well as the arguments and responses. So some of these quick calls have arguments like interface name, and some of them have responses in the JSON response format. So these need to match up so that the test case can interact with both of them in the same way. So the easiest way to do that is to just copy and paste all these quick calls into the Cisco quick call library. I'll press this collapse all button, roll them up nicely, going to shift click on all the quick calls and just copy and paste them. Now of course these commands themselves won't actually work because these commands are for Juniper, but we have the right names and we have the right arguments and response names for each of these as well. So I'll go ahead and just clear out the commands for each of these quick calls. And we're left with kind of a list of the quick calls that we need to build for our Cisco quick call library. Now I'm going to do that the same way that we built our Juniper quick calls. I'm going to capture the commands, I'm going to build response maps for those commands, and then I'm going to add the commands into these quick calls and build analysis rules to return the information the test case needs. Fast forwarding a few minutes, I've gone ahead and created all the commands inside the quick calls and all the analysis rules to return the information that the test case needs. Same process as we did with the Juniper quick calls. I captured the commands, I built response maps for each of them. So here's our show interfaces, here's our show version, and then I added analysis rules to return the data via the JSON return keys. So now when I go back to my test case, all those errors are gone because these quick calls now exist for the Cisco topology that we configured for the test case. So I'd like to run it, but I know that we're missing a couple more steps. So if I look at my get chassis info step, we are using this expected firmware parameter, which lives on this parameters page. Now, this isn't the firmware value we're checking for on the Cisco. We could come into the parameters page and change this value each time we switch from Cisco to Juniper, but let's avoid that. Let's create a parameter file. So here in my automation project, I'm going to find the parameter files folder, right click, choose new parameter file. I'm going to call this Juniper parameters. And I'm just going to actually cut the parameter from my parameters page of the test case to the Juniper parameters. I'm also going to create a parameter file for the Cisco parameters. And I'm going to click finish, go ahead and paste that in here, and then put the value that we want. So how does the test case know which parameter file to look at? We're going to set one as global. So if I wanted to run this for Juniper, I could set that as the global parameter file. And I can also set my Juniper topology as the global. So if I run the test case, even though we're configured on the local topology to use the Cisco topology, if I run this, I have the option to choose which one we want to use. I would say generally stick to this using the global topology. If you want to use the local, you can unset the global topology. So we'll just have it always use that global topology. It's going to run on the Juniper just like it did before. And if I want to run on Cisco, I can just set the Cisco topology as global and the Cisco parameters file as global. That takes care of one issue. If I look at another issue, if I look at my get interface status, you can see that we're expecting the value here to be up with a capital U. But if I look at my Cisco quick call library, Cisco's text is a little different here. We have up with a lowercase u when the link is up, and if the link is disabled, it says, instead of just down with a capital D, it says administratively down in all lowercase. So what we're going to do is make our quick calls basically translate the Cisco version to match what we use in the Juniper version. So the Juniper version is going to be our standard response. The way I handle that is to change this store processor. Instead of returning the response value here, we're going to save it as a local variable. And we're going to add a step. It's going to be an if statement. And I'm going to say if link status equals up we're going to print up with a capital U. Otherwise, I'm going to print down with a capital D. And I'm going to add an analysis rule query here is going to be response line. Response line is a built-in iTest query that just grabs the first line of the response. In our case, it's going to be the entire response because there's only one line. So it's going to grab the text up and we're going to return that as a return value. And I can actually just copy and paste this analysis rule to the down case as well. So now when we run this analysis rule on our test case, instead of the lowercase up here, we're going to get the uppercase that the test case is expecting. Now that we have all the quick calls built to match the Juniper quick calls, that includes the quick call names, the argument names that we were supplying, the return queries that come back from the quick calls, and even the values that the test case expects. We can now run this test on either Cisco or Juniper devices. So let's go ahead and run this test and just make sure it works. And it looks like it is working. So now we're running on the Cisco topology. We can see these quick calls are using the right names, the right argument names, and the right return, not only keys, but the translated status there. We're using uppercase U now. And if we want to run this on the Juniper topology, all we have to do is set the Juniper topology to global, set the parameter file to global for Juniper, and run it. Now we're running on the Juniper device instead of the Cisco. So I hope you can see how powerful this can be. We have one test script that we had to build, and we only have one to maintain going forward. And this can work on any number of devices. All we have to do is build that quick call library for the new device family that we come across. So if a totally new switch vendor comes along and we want to test that one, all we have to do is build the new quick call library for it, and we can run our same test cases against it.